Organizations that have become global have really turned the business world on its side in terms of being complex. And that's because ethical beliefs are not universally the same around the world. And that's because we don't all come from the same family, the same religion, the same friend structure. However, you will in your career possibly work for a multinational organization. If that's the case, it's going to be very important that you can understand why people think differently and why ethical beliefs might be different between you and the person sitting next to you. And even if you don't work for a multinational corporation, it's very likely that you will work from people that come from different religions in different parts of the world, even if you just work in a local company, due to the mobility of people around the world. People up and move around the world today at a much faster rate than ever before, and there's no reason to believe that will slow down. Good ethics is simply good business. If you can't wrap your arms around the concept that doing the right thing is what should be done just simply for the sake of doing the right thing, then think about all of the companies that have made headlines in the 1990s and in the 2000s for making bad decisions. Look at the financial collapse that's going on right now in the fall of 2008 that has been the result of some unethical business practices derived simply from greed. And so it's always important for good in business to practice good ethics. And the reasons are, one, it can protect the organization and its employees from legal action. If a company behaves badly, and remember, a company doesn't behave, a company is a group of people. People behave. So you are likely to be in a position at some point to make a decision to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And if you do the wrong thing, you do put your company, yourself and your company, at risk for legal action. And if something seriously goes wrong in the company, employees are out of work, people lose their pension, etc. Good ethics simply produces good business. Good ethics is necessary but not sufficient for success. A company can't, simply be inefficient and make lousy quality products and charge really high prices and expect to be successful just simply because they're ethical. However, a company that does all the right things and is unethical is likely to end up out of business. So it simply produces good business. It's just the right thing to do for an ongoing concern. Companies that do unethical things will undoubtedly be embarrassed in the press, and no company wants to have unfavorable publicity. As you can imagine, this is going to hurt sales and hurt stock prices and hurt the long-run viability of the company. And then finally, companies that practice good ethics can gain the goodwill of the community, whatever the community is, whether the community is, whether you're a local company, the community could be, a part of a state, the community could be the world, depending on the reach of the company that you are talking about. I've been led to believe that by the time you're a junior in college, you know how to read. And so therefore, I'm not going to simply talk to you about the definitions that are included in the chapter. These are all, worth talking about. What is virtue? What is integrity? What is a moral code? But you can read them. The chapter is very easy to read. Instead, what I'd like to concentrate on is the ethical decision-making process, which I would argue has 5 steps to it. The first step in ethical decision-making is to make sure you get all the facts. It's not unusual for an employee to come to a manager with a problem or for you as a professional to simply notice something that you think is a problem. It's important before you kind of take off on a piece of information that you get all the facts and you weigh all the facts properly. The second step then is to identify all the stakeholders and their various positions within the ethical dilemma. Now, a stakeholder is any person or any group of persons who can or would likely be affected by the decision that you're about to make. The third step then is to develop and evaluate the alternatives. Regardless of what you're faced with, chances are excellent that there's more than one alternative. And so it's important to kind of open your mind and brainstorm a little bit to consider various options rather than what seems to be the only option that comes to you at first blush. And once you develop the alternatives, you need to evaluate each one of them in terms of the various stakeholders. And so that brings you to step 4, where you consider the consequences of each option. So if you have 2 or 3 options, you want to look at what would happen to each stakeholder given each one of the alternatives that you're considering. And in terms of considering the consequences, you're going to want to use as many frameworks as possible in making a decision, because all of the frameworks which I'm about to present to you have their positive and their negative points. None of them is perfect. If any one of them was perfect, we'd only have one framework and the rest of them would disappear. But these are philosophical frameworks, and so they've got their pros and their cons. And so the more that you utilize, probably the better informed you'll be, and the more likely it will be that you'll make a good decision. So the first framework we'll take a look at is the virtue ethics framework. And the ethical choice under the virtue ethics framework would be the one that best reflects the moral virtues of you and your community. The idea is that you would make a decision based on what a person you admire would do. I think sometimes about when I was younger, when I was a teenager. And when you're a teenager, and I'm sure you can remember this, you're faced with a number of dilemmas because you start to make your own decisions as opposed to your parents making all your decisions for you. And I remember that one thing that I used to try to do to make the right decision was I would think, okay, if my mother could see what I'm doing about what I'm doing right now, how would I feel about that? So if I knew that my mother would freak out, then I kind of knew it was probably not a good decision. Now that doesn't mean that I never did those things, but it was basically using this kind of framework where I would say, okay, what would my mother, who was someone that I admired, what would she do or what would she think about a particular action that I'm thinking about? So if you were to use the virtue ethics framework, the first thing you should do is think about, who is someone that you really admire? Who is someone that you believe does, quote, the right thing, whatever the right thing might be? The virtue ethics framework assumes that people are simply guided by their virtues in reaching the right decision. And a virtue is simply a habit that you have that leads you towards doing the right thing, as opposed to a vice, which is a habit that you have that tends to lead you towards doing the wrong thing. So the value behind the virtue ethics framework is that you give some thought to, okay, what would this person do? Gandhi is probably someone that we all admire. So if we were to use Gandhi as the example and say, okay, how would Gandhi behave in this situation? What decision would he make? You choose who it is that would be your model. Now, you can see the downside in this framework is that it's not going to bring the same decision to everyone, because what the right thing is depends very much on one's culture and the norms in one's culture. For instance, in parts of Asia, the belief is that if you have knowledge and you don't share it, that's a very serious wrong. It's really takes a precedence in terms of being wrong. And so what you find is in some of those cultures, software piracy is very high. And the reason for that is that these people that come from that culture believe that, well, let's say I have a spreadsheet and that allows me to amass some knowledge. If I don't share that with someone, then I'm holding it to myself, and that's wrong because I'm preventing someone else from having this knowledge, which is important. And that's what some people believe. Now, on the other hand, in the United States, the norm would be that you need to buy that software because that's what's considered right in the United States. These are the kinds of things that cause ethical dilemmas to arise when you have honest beliefs and norms that say, on the one hand, this is a good thing to do, and then on the other hand, something else is a good thing to do. So the downside of the virtue ethics framework is that the person that we admire that helps us to determine what decision we should make is going to be different for every person. And so you don't have much guidance on what's right because this person that we admire, their decision making is going to depend on their culture, their norms, their upbringing. The second framework we're going to look at is the utilitarian framework. And I think the utilitarian framework very much meshes with the philosophy in business. Under the utilitarian framework, the choice that is most ethical is the one that produces the greatest excess of benefits over harm. So you can think of that as doing a cost-benefit analysis, where the benefits are obviously the good, and the costs are the harm or the bad. And in business, you try to amass a large profit, and a large profit is the greatest benefit over costs. And so that's why I think that it's probably goes along in the thinking of business. So under the utilitarian framework, the idea is make the best overall decision after you've balanced the consequences for all stakeholders. So when you're making a decision, the reason that you have an ethical dilemma is that for some of the stakeholders, there's going to be bad outcomes, and for some of the stakeholders, there's going to be good outcomes. If all the stakeholders were going to have good outcomes, there would not be a dilemma. So what you want to do is try to imagine, okay, how many people will be harmed, and what's the likelihood they'll be harmed, and how badly will they be harmed, and then take a look at the other group and say, okay, which stakeholders will receive a benefit, how likely will they receive that benefit, and how big will that benefit actually be. And if you could try to assign some kind of a numeric value, and here's where it gets tricky, but if you could kind of assign some kind of numeric value to the benefits and the harms, you want to choose the decision that's going to provide the greatest net benefit. And so it is similar to the different concepts in business of economic utility, for those of you that can remember your economics courses, or to cost-benefit analysis, as I already said. Now, the downside of the utilitarian framework is that it's difficult to measure and compare things that are different. So, for instance, when I said, assign some kind of a numeric value to the outcomes, if we were talking all money, that would be fine. If we were talking all the same kind of units, it would work well. However, how do you compare things like earning a huge amount of money and at the same being a benefit, and the harm could be serious destruction to the environment? It's like adding apples and oranges, adding and subtracting environment and money. It's difficult to do. I would suggest that this is a valuable framework, and it's worth trying to, in some ways, measure things that are not easily measured or compared against one another's so that you can at least have this perspective.